All right. So good afternoon again, everyone. It's been, a long day, but it's also important for us to move ahead with some of the important business for our committee and for the city as a whole. So one of the things that we understand was facing us has been the issue of homelessness in Baltimore. And several months ago, we did ask for updates in terms of what's going on as far as the Office of Homelessness, but also look at the issues of homeless shelters within our city. And so today we're going to be having legislative oversight hearing. This is LO 200080, legislative oversight hearing, homeless shelters in Baltimore City. And again, the purpose of the committee is conducting a legislative oversight hearing on the condition of homeless shelters in the city. All right. So again, this meeting is open to the public as always. I do see that we're represented both by the mayor's office of government relations, but also mayor's office of homeless services. So at this point, I do want to provide opportunities for both to give us updates on where things stand before we go into some of the testimony and some of the questions from the committee. So please go ahead.
Hello, Councilman Bullock. This is Tisha Edwards, Acting Director of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. We do have
First, I want to say, Ms. Edwards, thank you for joining us. I know that you had a packed agenda today, so thank you for making the time to join us. It's very much appreciated.
Yes, sir, no problem. I am double booked, so I am going to also rely on my colleague, Councilman Bullock, Angela McCauley, who is also on the line. She actually leads our shelter management services. She does have a presentation for the council, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. That'd be very helpful. So, Ms. McCauley, please, and thank you for joining us.
So how do we get the presentation on the screen, Councilman? What's the best way to do this?
Okay, hang on. Bear with us for a minute.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, you should be able to share the screen now. I think you're listed as a presenter, so if you can go ahead, try.
Okay, give me just a second on this end then. Give us just a moment, Councilman Burnett. We're pulling it up on our side. I apologize for the delay.
Not a problem. And then just so everyone knows, we'll be hearing, we'll be seeing this presentation. And then we'll also hear from some folks who have been personally affected, but also just a perspective on the issue. Again, part of it is us trying to not only get answers, but also work towards solutions that are going to be useful and actionable for all involved. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, please go right ahead. We can see the screen now.
Angela, can you put it in slideshow view, please? Up at the top. And from the beginning. Okay, great. Angela, I'm going to pass it over to you. You want to come off mute and you can lead the presentation on behalf of the agency. Thank you so much. You're still on mute, Angela. Okay, I think we're
You're off
good.
mute now.
Thank you. We're losing sound, Angela. Just a second. We don't have you. She's not showing mute, but we cannot hear her.
That's weird. All right, please try again. Okay, for some reason we can't hear you, but I know you're not muted.
This may have to do with her headphones. I don't know if she has a microphone directly on the thing and she can speak without headphones, without unplug the headphones. Maybe that'll work.
Still can't hear you.
Are your headphones still plugged in, Ms. McCauley?
She said, give her 1 second, Councilman Bullock.
Not the problem.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Angela McCauley. I'm the emergency.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you,
Perfect. Thank
Angela.
All right. Let's see. Isn't, okay. It won't let me share my screen. It's not, it doesn't let me share my screen because I'm not a panelist. See, it won't let me share my screen. So you might have to just read it with your buttons on. All right. Stand by one moment. I apologize for the delay. Because Maria is not a panelist, she can't share her screen, so I will read the presentation from my desk.
Maria Martins Evans.
Yes, sir. All right, our mission at the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring in Baltimore City.
Angela, can you hold on for 1 second?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Bullock, are you able to make Maria a presenter?
We're working on that now.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Thank you so much.
Can you see it? Yeah.
Yes, we can see. Yes, we can see it, Maria. If you can go to slideshow and from the beginning. Great. You all right, Angela?
Yes.
Okay,
Look,
good.
we understand. Believe me, we're all going through our technical difficulties. We're all learning and growing together. So thank you, and please proceed.
All right. Okay, again, my name is Angela McCauley. I'm the Emergency Service Coordinator for the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. Our mission is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring here in Baltimore City. Our challenge is we have over 2,200 individuals experiencing homelessness in Baltimore City. And on any given night, over 50% of folks are renters living in housing that they cannot afford. Our responsibility here at the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, we lead a strategic community-wide planning that administers $68 million in federal, state, and local funds and coordinates emergency response efforts. Now let me introduce you to the emergency services team. I've introduced myself. We also have site coordinator Mashala Holt, who directly supervises the prevention sites. Our two emergency services associates, Derek Johnson and Flora Jones, who coordinate our coordinated entry line, as well as winter shelter. Our key initiatives for this team to oversee the coordinated access process efforts to move shelter residents into permanent housing. During our COVID-19 response, we've managed to move over 150 high-risk shelter clients to hotels in early April. Through a collaboration with the Baltimore City Health Department, they've assisted with overseeing screening and testing programs that have assisted us in avoiding any significant outbreaks in our emergency shelters. Winter shelter process, we lead the winter shelter efforts for Baltimore City to assist clients with accessing safe shelter during the colder months. Our shelter design currently is actively undergoing renovations to update facilities to provide increased social distancing, to also comply with CDC guidance for congregate settings. As you can see, we're expanding the emergency services team to better respond to expected increase in homelessness due to COVID-19. The Mayor's Office of Homeless Services currently funds 9 city-funded shelters. As you can see the list here, from a veteran transitional housing program to our men's shelter, our domestic violence shelter, our women's shelter. Project Place has 2 locations, our family shelter, Sarah's Hope, the Nest for our youth, and a Weinberg Housing and Resource Center, which includes a convalescent dorm. Our coordinated entry to shelter just launched this month on October the 15th. We have a centralized hotline at 443-984-9540 for people experiencing or at risk for homelessness in Baltimore City. This line is designed to provide fast, streamlined, equitable process to enroll any clients in our participating emergency shelters. The hotline triage process also provides other resources for callers calling in. So when a caller is seeking shelter, there's also an option to reach our outreach services, as well as our relaunch shelter concerns line. Our coordinated entry really ensures for increased capacity to track our intakes accurately. Community engagement. Ensuring clients can access safe and reliable shelter is a priority for our office. The launch shelter concerns line in October again allows clients to call in and express any concerns. Someone will follow back up with them within 72 hours, provide any additional supports, or address any concerns that have not been able to be addressed within the shelter. MOHS is committed to collaborating with community members near the shelter and across Baltimore City to answer any questions and respond to any concerns. Our office engaged with the Continuum of Care committees like Lived Experience Advisory Committee, the Shelter Transformation Committee, and Coordinated Access Committee to develop new ideas and gather feedback for shelter management. Continued shelter improvements. In collaboration with the Department of General Services and shelter operators, MOHS is drafting capital improvement plans for Penderhughes, Green Spring, and WHRC to ensure CDC guidance is met. Recent and ongoing improvements in the shelters. We've conducted assessments to address issues with hot water, currently ensuring heating systems are fully operational before winter, and regular assessments to update our shower systems, HVAC, and other facility needs. MOHS is continuously working with clients in the community to address concerns about conditions, COVID-19 safety issues, and site plans and procedures. Our COVID-19 response. Our priority is to mitigate the threat of COVID-19 to vulnerable community members, especially those residing in emergency shelters. Rapid rehousing programs prioritizing clients most at risk for COVID-19 complications. Shelters undergoing renovations to improve social distancing. Our partnerships with the Baltimore City Health Department and Healthcare for the Homeless provide consistent screening and testing for our tri-centers to assist with clients that may be exposed to COVID or have tested positive. We're adhering to CDC guidelines with the guidance from the Baltimore City Health Department. FY21 Winter Shelter Plan, MOHS has secured additional shelter beds as a part of the Winter Shelter Plan as follows. WHRC, which is currently housed at the Holiday Inn Express, we have additional 30 beds to meet the client's needs. Shelter capacity for women has increased by 20 beds, additional 29 beds at the Green Spring Men's Shelter, 60 beds at McVett's, and Holiday Inn Express at Gay Street is also providing additional beds for families and females. And as I mentioned previously, the Lower Baltimore will house clients with additional healthcare needs. Unfortunately, our women's centers will not be open this year because of CAP centers are closed to the public. And currently our street outreach is managed exclusively by the MOHS outreach team and the PEP outreach team. Our winter shelter plan is currently on our website. It shares information regarding our shelter transportation that starts at 6:45 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. Transportation is available from our Beans and Bread location, Penderhugh Shelter, My Sister's Place, the Green Spring Shelter, Healthcare for the Homeless, and McVett. On weekends, our outreach teams are available for transportation assistance. Housing services. The federal COVID-19 relief funding, ESG, allocated $7.2 million for rapid rehousing. This provides housing for a minimum of 150 households. Funding includes intensive case management for households to help ensure housing permanency. MOHS, shelter providers, and hotel staff will focus on enrolling clients in our housing system to move clients into their own home. Supporting clients as they work toward permanent housing is a key priority for our office. Thank you.
First, I want to thank you, for the presentation and thank you for your work on the front lines. I do want to provide an opportunity for members of the committee to ask any questions of MOHS before we go to some of our panelists as well. Any questions from the committee first?
I do, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm having connection issues, so I'm going to have to do audio. This is Councilmember Burnett.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Burnett. Please go ahead.
I don't recall seeing it in the presentation, and my apologies if I missed it. But can you speak to additional work being done to protect individuals from COVID? Obviously the concerns are sort of multifaceted around face mask distribution, testing, screening of both staff and individuals currently experiencing homelessness. Can you speak a little bit about that or elaborate a little bit more on what's being done to keep folks safe during the pandemic?
Yes, sir. Since the onset of COVID, our office has worked with the Baltimore City Health Department to ensure that we were following the CDC guidance for congregate settings. One of the first things we did was to move folks from out of the shelter into some of the hotel sites that I previously mentioned. We also have been working with the Department of General Services to make assessments to all of the shelters to ensure that we have the proper supplies with social distancing, barriers and partitions in the shelters. We have worked with the health department to do universal testing at our shelters as well. So we have not had any outbreaks at our shelters, and our outreach department has been consistent with delivering PPE supplies to all the providers that we fund in non-city funded shelters since March.
And I guess as a follow up on that, are people sharing spaces? Are they in individual rooms? Are they sharing bathrooms, or are there individual bathroom access for in both in the shelters and in the hotel spaces and other non-shelter spaces?
So at all of the hotels, everyone has their own restroom. The only two shelters that we still have clients in is Green Spring and I'll provide a St. Vincent de Paul. I put a lot of work into ensuring that there's social distancing inside the shelter. The whole building was moved from Monument Street over to Green Spring to ensure that we had enough space for clients to social distance. And the beds are actually 8 feet apart.
Okay. But they are but then there are instances where the rooms are spaced out, but they are sharing space in instances. Is that what you're saying? Just trying to understand the setup a little bit better.
Yes, that is the case in the congregate shelters. We also have additional cleaning happening at those shelters, Councilman Burnett, to make sure that we maintain the adequate level of cleanliness that is required in those congregate shelters. So even though we do still have individuals in congregate shelters, they all meet CDC guidelines, and we have not had any outbreaks in any of those facilities. So since, we have universal testing, we have temperature checking, we have masking, we have social distancing. And as Angela communicated, those shelters are regularly reviewed. The protocols are regularly reviewed by the health department. And thankfully, we have not had any outbreaks at those facilities. So in the case where there is congregate living, it is a congregate type of situation. Just to be clear, in the hotels, it's a much more private scenario. People are in their own rooms. They have access to their own bathrooms. Again, still maintaining, the CDC guidelines, but it is a different type of scenario than in the congregate living shelters.
And also, just to follow up on Councilman Burnett, because I think he asked some questions that a few of us were planning to ask as well. Just a couple things. One, previously was mentioned in terms of the hotels, and you just kind of touched upon that a little bit. So curious about how long that will be in place. And then also the return to the congregate situation as far as shelters. What's the timing on that if there is a movement from one to the other?
So our target date right now is December 31st, Councilman Bullock. The sheltering strategy is being funded by our CARES Act dollars. And so we have access to those dollars until the end of the year. And so what we have been doing in the meantime is a couple of things. First, we have a priority list of clients based on their age and underlying health conditions that we're trying our best to move them into more permanent housing. So our target is to take 150 individuals out of the hotels into more permanent housing. And again, we have a prioritization based on health risk. Those individuals who do not meet that initial priority list for more permanent housing, then we are working towards reopening the congregate shelters, both at Pender Hughes and WHRC, under CDC guidelines. So we have received, as I said before, the CDC guidelines. We're working with DGS to make the appropriate and put in place the appropriate safeguards so that when it comes a time that we need to move back into congregate shelters at those two locations, that they do meet both the health department and CDC guidelines. But the timeline is generally around December, the end of December. Again, that is contingent upon all of those safeguards and build outs, and there's some construction that we're doing. So there's a lot that has to be done in order to meet that timeline, but that is the target that we're working towards.
And thank you for that. And I know Councilman Burnett may have a couple others. I know Burnett and Bullock, we're going to go back and forth. I get it. One question that I do have, because you mentioned CARES Act funding. So from the federal government, any reimbursements from FEMA? How does that work? That's one part of the question. But then also you mentioned, and also Angela mentioned some of the capital improvements. So one, in terms of the first part of the question, what does it look like from the federal government? And then also two, what does it look like as far as the capital improvements? And then also shout out to my sons who are here, and they're pretty quiet today, so got to give them some love. But yeah, please go ahead and answer if you can.
You'll have to tell me, what do you mean specifically? What information do you need? The city received $130 million from the federal government for CARES Act to support our COVID response. So the COVID response includes everything that we're doing at the health department. You know, so the testing and the contact tracing. It also includes our eviction prevention program. So we have a whole list of expenses that meet the federal government guidelines. They are the one that tells us what is an allowable expense. And those funds are available to us until December 31st. Right. And we have to meet, as I said, those very specific guidelines associated with those dollars. Those dollars also pay for the MOHS's COVID response, which we've been talking about, which included moving individuals into hotels when we could not meet CDC guidelines. That's the trigger that pushed us into the hotels initially, is when we did an initial assessment at the beginning of COVID, our shelters did not meet that CDC threshold. So that meant that we could then use the CARES Act dollars for the strategy for housing. We are also able to use CARES Act dollars to get shelters into compliance with CDC guidelines. So those improvements that we are talking about are being underwritten by the CARES Act dollars, and they are significant. And when using those dollars, again, we have to be working towards meeting those CDC guidelines and health department guidelines. And once we do that, then that is what opens the door for us to be able to move individuals either into permanent housing or out of the hotels and back into our shelters for those individuals that need them.
Okay, that's helpful. And then the last part, and I'm sure others have questions too. When you talk about permanent housing, what does that look like, or what do you mean by that? If you could provide any detail, I know it could be varied, but I'm just curious.
So as Angela mentioned on the slide, Angela, can you go back to the slide that has the ESG allocation? So another pot of dollars that we received from the federal government was HUD dollars, and we are using about $7 million to provide housing subsidies for individuals who are in a position to move into housing. And the housing can be an apartment, it can be with a landlord and a home. It depends on kind of what the needs of that individuals are. And the $7.2 million is where we are getting the funding for the 150 families. And with that funding, we can help to subsidize rent payments for up to about 18 months.
Okay, that's helpful. And any other members of the committee that have questions? I don't want to monopolize the time.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilman Cohen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. McCauley and Director Edwards, for doing multiple people's jobs in a very trying circumstance. So two-part question. One, how many children are currently experiencing homelessness in the city of Baltimore? And two, what specific services are we providing to accommodate children during this time, knowing that there's all the added barriers of a pandemic, of school not being open, of virtual learning, of all the stress and anxiety of the current moment that we are all in?
So according to our census, and according to our census count, there are about 2,000 children who experience homelessness, but we think that they are underrepresented. I think the school system has a different number, so it depends on what source Councilman Cohen, that you're referring to, and how we get that information. A lot of times children are more willing to give that information in a school setting than they are in some of these other kind of census counts environments. But there are, thousands of children, some with their families and some older young people who are unaccompanied, but it is a significant number, and it is the largest number in the state of Maryland. And so there are lots of different strategies when we are engaged with individuals and families. We, have a full outreach team. We have partnerships. Angela, can you go back to the slide that shows our shelters? We have partnerships and providers where we do family-based placement for families who are experiencing homelessness. We also received an additional $3 million from HUD to provide services specifically for kind of what I would call older youth who are experiencing homelessness. So there's a wide range of services through our caseworkers, through our providers, through the school system. Although virtual, still have access to social workers. We still have access to our community school coordinators. So there is a wide range of resources that we are using to tap into that community. But I would also say, Councilman Cohen, that there is still a lot of work that we need to do to be able to fully and adequately support the needs of young people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
And you should know those young people that we know that are in our shelters and in shelters with our providers. On the virtual learning piece, we did outreach to all of those families, Councilman Cohen, to make sure that they had gotten access to their laptops. We helped families with school supplies. So through our case management and through our partners, we do make every diligent effort to meet the needs of those young people, because we know that they are hyper vulnerable.
Real quick on that. So are they getting, you mentioned case management. So are they getting support with transportation, job access, mental health? How deep are we going with the approximately 2,000 or more children that are experiencing homelessness?
It depends on how they show up in the system. So, right. So as with most vulnerable families, it's kind of where you meet them in the process. So when you're talking about young people who are doing kind of couch surfing homelessness, and a lot of that is happening through their own network. And I would argue that unless they're connected to school, we're probably not touching them as deeply as we would like. Youth who are homeless that are in our shelters, they are a part of a structure and a community that allows for a more deeper engagement. So I think it varies depending upon where they show up, where that homelessness shows up. It varies by age. It varies if they're, unaccompanied versus with a family. Angela, did you want to add anything to that in terms of how we're working with youth who show up as homeless in our various systems, and those who sometimes don't show up in a really specific way? Did you want to add something to that, Angela?
Well, listed here we have the Nest is our identified youth shelter, and they provide case management services, as you mentioned, and they partner with other programs to provide additional services for that group.
So it really just depends, Councilman Cohen, where we are reaching those young people. And, again, I think in all of our work around homelessness, it is growing. The pandemic has absolutely increased the full range of needs of individuals, not just children. And we are doing everything that we can to respond as best we possibly can. But there is absolutely a growing need in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I would just conclude, and thank you, Director Edwards and Chairman Bullock, just by saying, this is clearly an urgent need, always was, but more so now. And, we know wraparound services, case management, just as much support as is humanly possible that can be offered for young people that are homeless, that are experiencing homelessness, that are vulnerable in these types of ways. Just from everything we know about violence that ends up perpetuated or perpetrated onto these young people, to food insecurity, to what you were mentioning before about the couch surfing. I just think there's a strong need for adult intervention. And I know that funds are limited and resources are limited, but I would just push really hard for as much effective case management as we can possibly get. Can't be enough.
And I would just like to add, Councilman Cohen, that this issue of youth homelessness is a priority of the agency. We have, as I said, received an influx of funds from HUD, and we have a whole new group of partners who will help to address this in ways that we have not been able to do in the past. So we are doing everything, as you said, humanly possible to get to this group of children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen, and thank you, Ms. Edwards. One more question. Again, one of the things I appreciate about what you've been able to do is partnering with the federal government to get resources. And we know the pandemic has really hit our city in a very challenging way for our finances. Just thinking about our partnerships with the hotel, and you mentioned the federal government support. Are we making payments, or are we to pay for the beds at the hotel, or is it federal government money going straight to the hotel, or
No,
we get
because
reimbursed?
it's from us and they invoice us, and the federal government only pays for beds that are being used. So we get a bill just like you would when you check out, if you will, but we just don't get it. We get it on a monthly basis, right? How many beds we've used at that hotel, they bill us. And then we pay it through our regular fiscal management process. It does not go directly to the hotels. It comes directly to us. And throughout the pandemic, Councilman Bullock, we have increased the number of hotels and the number of beds, and hotels are a part of our winter shelter process. So we've been closely monitoring the need, and when the need shows up, we have been making arrangements with hotels who, I would like to say, in Baltimore have been very cooperative with us and supportive of this initiative, and accommodating. And we have expanded that strategy since April. I think, Angela, is the number 400 individuals in shelters at this point? I mean, excuse me, in hotels at this point?
Oh, that's correct.
Right. So we have about 400 individuals every single night, Councilman Bullock, in hotels throughout Baltimore. And we have done that since April. And we've purchased additional hotel rooms to support the winter shelter strategy.
Clearly, you have your hands full, and that's a lot going on. One thing I'll say, and obviously I have a role here for the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, but also a member of the Transportation Committee. And I know Councilman Dorsey had to step out for a minute, but I know as transportation guy, he'd asked us, how are folks getting around, and how are you working with MTA in terms of getting folks access to not only the shelters and hotels? How is that working?
So can you hear me, Councilman Bullock? Because on my end, okay, great. So we entered into a contract with a local minority business here in Baltimore, and we have, because again, we understand that transportation is limited due to MTA, because we wanted to provide our clients direct access to their appointments and other critical engagements that they have. This is not something that has historically been a part of the MOHS budget, but we did go out and pull together some funding for a one-year contract to provide shuttle service from our hotels to people's appointments, doctor's appointments, MBA, those kinds of things. So we are sponsoring transportation through the agency this year. We do not know if we will be able to sustain that going forward, because it is not a part of the normal programmatic strategy, but we have done that as a part of our overall COVID response.
Thank you. Other members of the committee, I know time is going to get short for Ms. Edwards. Any members of the committee have additional questions like to ask at this point? And I know Angela's going to be around, but any questions at this point from members of the committee? Okay, well, again, I thank you. I thank you for all the work that you're doing, and I know, again, I know there'll be additional questions that are going to come up. So, thank you for staying on with us. I do want to recognize that there are also members who have reached out, and a lot of this, honestly, wouldn't occur without housing our neighbors. And we know there's a number of representatives who would like to speak. So, I see on our list we have, and I'll go in this order of Anthony Williams. We have Will, we have Akumba Yassin, we have Dr. Chaudhry, we have Ingrid Lofgren and Harriet Smith, again, representing Baltimore Harm Reduction, Homeless Persons Representation Project, representatives and residents of Pender Hughes and Fairfield Inn, and then also Green Spring. So is Anthony Williams available, or we'll just go in that order, whoever is able to join us at this point? Okay. Mr. Williams, we can have your testimony now if you're ready. Yes, we'll just go down the list, and hopefully we'll get to everybody who is looking to give us testimony at this point. So we'll just move on.
Let me try. Let me try Mr. Williams again. Mr. Williams? Anthony Williams? Okay, so go back. Chief Oriani?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're on.
Can you, yeah, my name is HK I'm with People Encouraging People, and we are working through city funding for homeless outreach in the city. And you can imagine, with the 400 capacity individuals we have in the hotel now, we still have lots of people who haven't made it into the shelter. And with the support of ESG funding through the city, we've been also providing kind of a quasi hotel shelter, which is part of the count that's not part of the care as funded part in the city. So we do really find it very difficult now to stare people in the face and tell them that there is no shelter available. And so we have lots, especially families that cycle through, and it's been really, really tough, to see, like this morning, just beginning of the day, you have a mother with 6 children show up in front, and there is no way to send the person away. And so, we try to do the best to at least provide temporary accommodation. And since the target of our outreach is mostly people who have severe mental illness together with homelessness as part of their struggle, it is super, super, super stressful and difficult now. And the counts we have in the city regarding homeless individuals, we do know that this is definitely on the count, because when the weather starts turning down, south, we have people who are in abandos. We have, these individuals showing up. So, we're just looking at some ways where this kind of conditions could be ameliorated, through, more support in the system, because Angela, the MOHS team, they are doing great work, but to say that there's less funding for accommodating, especially the most vulnerable, individuals in the city, it is really, really on the low side, because one, being in the shelter, for example, they have to obey certain rules, they have to conduct themselves in certain ways. And so you're not having consistent calls for people to come and kind of do clinical interventions. The population we are serving are these people. And so it is really, really tough, on us, having to try to, reach out to these people. And those people, we don't want to talk about those people in the encampments. The city, the MHS team comes there, Patapsco, Brooklyn area, the areas where people are unsheltered. So somewhere, it's like, we have to keep asking if there are ways that this particular group can be captured and recognized. And there are those who, no matter how you work it, they can get along with the next person, no matter how decent accommodation you provide. They don't want to be in the space with some other person. So we have the quadruple issue of dealing with this. Someone, struggling with homelessness, severe mental health issue, addiction issues, just put together. So, some way for the city to recognize that people within this jurisdiction, and especially those with boots on the ground that do this, these are the challenges we face on a daily basis.
So I'll just say thank you very much for that testimony. I mean, as you mentioned vulnerable populations, you lift up two very important pieces as you reference mental health and addiction. Again, we know that some of our issues around homelessness are multifaceted. So again, thank you for raising that point.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Chair, we have Bonnie Lane. We moved over to the panel, but let's see if she's still there.
Okay, Ms. Lane.
I yield. I don't know how I got on the panel.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll keep going down the list. Appreciate that.
Okay. Adriana Foster.
Okay.
Adriana Foster.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, this is Rachel Cutler. I'm here with Kumba Yassin, and it's a little bit difficult to understand how to unmute in this model. I know Anthony Williams is on the call, so I would encourage us to try him again. But I'm gonna yield to Kumba, who's gonna give her testimony.
Hi, my name is Kumba Yassin. I've been a resident in the Pender Hughes shelter in West Baltimore. And I would describe the conditions of the shelter. I'm grateful, let me say that first, for the shelter. But the shelter at Pender Hughes had mold in it, number one. And during this pandemic, again, it's for us to go back. It would be unfortunate. For me, it would be like a death sentence. And I'm gonna go on to say that on June the 4th, we were transferred to the Fairfield Inn. I've seen a lot of things transpire that I feel uncomfortable with. For example, 3 women have died in such a short period of time. A new shelter provider came in on October the 1st. We were told that we have to keep our doors open while staying in our rooms, which makes a lot of women feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Going back to Pender Hughes would seem going back to Pender Hughes would seem for me would send me into a more depression state. A few minutes ago you talked about mental health and drug addiction. Okay, for me it's like having right now and being at the hotel, it's like having your own place and then being thrown back to the wolves. Whereas at the hotel, we can bring our own meals and have our own space. At the shelters, we have to worry about things being stolen. It's like going from a room to a closet, let me say that. We will have to go back to living side by side in a tight area. We can't social distance at the shelter. We which would mean we would have to wear our masks at all times. Residents are free to come and go as they please during the day and return to the shelters at night in a tight sleeping area. This puts us all at risk for contracting COVID. I worry about a lot of the residents that are not strong enough to go back to the shelters. Go back to the shelters will be like a death sentence. Let's see. Okay.
We cannot.
Okay. We cannot, in my opinion, we cannot go back to the shelters. Sending us back to the shelters in the winter in the pandemic is like putting our lives at stake. Please halt the plans for returning us back to shelters. And one more thing I want to say really quickly is that the coordinated access, no one at the shelter that works there has done anything as far as like hooking people up with coordinated access. So I'm done. Thank you.
If I could.
No, thank you for that. Please proceed. Go ahead.
And just I know, Will, who's probably on the call, is Daniel Wilson, is trying to get on the call. He was trying to unmute. I think he was skipped.
All right, we'll take a look. So we have Daniel Wilson.
Okay. You want to take them out of order, Mr. Chair?
Sure. If you could get Anthony Williams, if you see him.
Well, yeah, I see him. So who do you want to go first?
Let's go Anthony Williams.
Okay. Okay. Anthony Williams is on. Mr. Williams, you're on. The Arnold Montford has his hand up.
I'm sorry.
Arnold Montford has his hand up. He's next.
All right, we'll go the next person then. We'll try to keep working on it.
Arnold Montford.
Yes, sir. How you doing? How's everyone? I'm gonna just jump straight into it. There was a couple things that I heard while I was listening that I completely 100% disagree with, and I'll start with the first one is the lie about the COVID outbreaks not happening in any of the shelters. That's a lie because I've seen where 3 to 4 people have been taken out by ambulance, and then they came back and they've taken maybe 4 or 5 different people out at a time because they had communication, or they hung with that person on a daily basis. That was the first thing. The conditions as far as social distancing, that's a joke. There is no 8 feet between any man in there. We share one bathroom between I would say probably 120 men on 2 sides of one level of what would be classrooms. We share one bathroom with 5 stalls. Is ridiculous in the conditions. It's not cleaned how it should be, let alone the fact that we're sharing. You got people not washing their hands, and then the people that do want to be sanitary, wash their hands and stuff, there's no soap or hand sanitizer put in throughout the building. There are
because we needed to get an ethics opinion on something for the mayors going out of office. So if you could give me a call back at 443-401-7044. I just wanted to figure out what the best, what the process is for getting that approval or just ruling in general. Again, Nina from the mayor's office, 443-401-7044. Thank you.
Sorry. I don't know what that was about. I guess there was the devil trying to get me out of the way. Can't everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, hello, we can hear you now.
Okay. So, the other thing I wanted to speak on, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like the young lady said before me,
Are
I'm
you serious?
completely grateful for, being able to be somewhere and not outside in the cold. I want to say that because I don't want to feel like I'm nagging. I'm just trying to speak for people that don't have a voice and the people that are afraid to because of retaliation that could possibly happen within the shelter. Which goes to another thing that I wanted to speak on, which is aggressive staff working inside of these facilities. Not only do they not do their job, they go to sleep when we're asleep. They don't secure the building. There was a situation where 6 men came in the back door and was attempting to assault somebody, and it was because the doors were open. The building wasn't secure. We also got staff failing. The reason for the complaints about food is because a lot of times it's not only is it not served on time, the food is old, old lettuce, old vegetables. I mean, send people directly to the bathroom. Obvious cases of minor food poisoning. Um, the social distancing, and I can only speak on Green Spring, is poor. Not only do you have staff members walking around without masks, you got clients that are not pressed to wear their masks. And, again, it goes to the sanitation of the building, soap and hand sanitizer. I don't know about masks. I can't say that the masks weren't, or the supplies weren't given to the facility because there's a lot of stuff going on at Green Spring. I can only speak on this building. But the thing about it is that the issue's not going to get fixed if you have ignorance in the place of the positions inside of these buildings, as far as caseworkers, supervisors, directors. I'm just speaking abroad in a broad fashion because I don't really know who. There's a lack of communication between staff members. Um, they I mean, it's so much that I could speak on. I'm trying to pick the important things because I don't want to bore anybody or sound like I'm just complaining. But what I on a personal note, I would suggest people to actually lay their eyes on these situations, do some pop ups, just randomly pop up at the building and tour the buildings, man. I mean, even down to the showers, they got us taking showers in the old, obviously it's a school shower, so it's an old locker room where the towels are coming up. You can see obvious mold and mildew under the floors. I mean, on the walls. The showers aren't clean. Stalls aren't clean how they're supposed to be clean. I mean, it's just a lack of. There's a bunch of lies floating around, is what I'll say. People that are deceiving other people. I don't know who, but it's lies that are being told that things are being done that are not being done, and I can speak firsthand on that because I'm in the situation. I can tell you right now that these buildings are nowhere near sanitary, nowhere near the governor's orders of social distancing, and that is why I've been in contact with him as well. I wrote him letters, and I've sent him direct emails and left him voice messages because it seems like within the city, nothing gets done. And it's ridiculous because the people who don't have these voices and who are being treated like pure trash in these situations, we get looked at as if we're nothing and we're treated the same. So it's kind of like, you get put in a situation where you're like, oh, well, people look at me this way. I might, right, right.
Well, I'll say this, we really appreciate your testimony. Again,
Oh, my bad.
you have a firsthand view of the challenges. And so also, I know that Angela from MOHS is with us. And I see that she's taking notes. I don't know if there are any points you want to respond to at this point, if you just want to kind of hear it all out and address things. So we're open to either approach. But again, thank you for that testimony. I know we have a bunch of people who are looking to testify, so we do want to be able to move on to the next person who's looking to testify.
Okay. Calling user 17. Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Go ahead, please. Okay. Calling user 18. Okay. Calling user 19. Calling user 19. Uh-huh. Yeah, listen to the beeps. That's all. Yeah. Calling the 19. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Richard Mayo. I am actually I'm a current recipient of, or I reside in the motels, one of the motels. And I would like to thank you, Mr. Larry Green, for hosting, and Councilman Bullock. And your son, Council Bullock, I see your son over there. Thank you, future leader of our city and hopefully our country. So anyway, I'll briefly go in there because I've been with the COC and the CRC as well as Housing Our Neighbor with a lived-in experience. However, because of personal matters and my pre-existing conditions, I kind of had to be away from the meeting. However, I managed, and I've worked with Ms. Angela from time to time. I've brought up some issues even with the previous director. The main thing I'm bringing that up is because I never bring issues just from the client's perspective. I like to bring... Pardon?
No, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd like to bring the matters and the concerns from both the clients as someone that's on the ground who's living it, and as well who's observant and seeing both sides of the issue. So from the providers, some of the issues they're saying is not enough staff, the need for structure, and I'm going to go through these real quick because I was not scheduled to speak. So rules and regulations, which a lot of times just devolves into law and order, or and non-cooperative clients, irredeemable clients, according to the providers, chronic offending clients, chronic homelessness, substance abuse, inability to become productive members of society, frustration on the job, or which comes out to the job fatigue. On the client side of it, there's an issue of not being respected, feeling like they're just being treated like animals. And when I was assistant director, which brings me this unique perspective, is we worked with a program called Restoring the Dignity of Men, because it was a men's transitional housing program. However, I'm not applying for a job here. I'm just saying restoring the dignity of men and the people in the homeless, criminalization of the homeless, the safety or lack thereof, the lack of resources, programs, to be productive members of society. So I come with the solution. I come bearing gifts. The solutions I had in mind would be from the provider side of it. We can have, let's take three main things to focus on. That's the procurement of funds or properties, or getting in recruitment of employees. So it's going to be three recurring themes that I labeled: procurement, inventory, or taking stock of what's the cash on hand, and the appropriation of said inventory and cash. So to make sure everything is cost effective and making the most of taxpayer and public funds. So the available units and shelters and housing. So with that, it's a matter of taking inventory of how many of the city-funded properties are available, because a lot of people say it's between 5,000 to even 12,000 properties, and see how we can use those, because I heard Ms. Angela mentioning that there's 2,200 in the homeless community. So making sure that the 2,200 can either be placed in one of these to see how they can get them into these units. And there's always a matter of support staff. They say we need more staffing. So which is the staffing issue is an issue on both sides. On one side, the providers are saying we need more staff. And on the other side, yes, but we don't want the staff to harass us. We don't want more people to harass us. We already got enough harassing us. And some can work remotely. If your job description is strictly to get somebody out, you can work from home and say, okay, I make these many phone calls. I have this many clients. Out of these 10, my quota for the week is to see how I can get these 5 on the pathway to be housed. So those that are working remotely, that's cool. The ones that are on site is the case managers, the case managers with mental health as a priority, and those that are security be limited in a security function. Let the jobs not overlap, because a security guard is not a case manager and vice versa. And so restoring the dignity of the homeless involves eliminating some of these draconian policies that they have. Even when they were at shelters, they then took those draconian policies and implemented them at Holiday Inn Express. And so their concern is like, well, we have people that come in and they disobey our rules, so we have to put them out. So I was under the impression that the city had already procured the whole entire building with 130 rooms, for example. So at sometimes they're getting 10, 15 people thrown out every day. So I was under the impression that the city's already paid for that, but people are getting thrown out and the rooms are not occupied. So I've just heard from Ms. Tisha that they pay on a monthly basis based on how many people in the room. So I'll need to clarify and edify that for myself later. And then, so with that said, the homeless, we have 5 categories of the homeless. We can have a phase because there's certain people like myself that are ready to be housed or ready to get into an apartment. And so my issues are separate or independent from everyone else, even though I'm not seeking those as of now. I'm saying if someone like me would then qualify, would be in category 5 versus, so category 1, 2, 3 would involve people that are chronically homeless, have substance abuse issues, have criminal background issues, have mental health issues, socially reclusive, have aggressive and predatory behavior, and unable to abide by societal rules and norms. Now, 4 and 5 is the ones that are ready to be transitioned in. So that would be those that are mentally acute, that are socially functioning, that have jobs or recently housed. So to sum it up, because I don't want to hold up too much time. Right now, we're worried about the pandemic, and we were given a December 31st. But even though we're going into the second surge of this virus, so we're going to also deal with the twindemic, with the flu season, and then we're going to have a tripdemic with the flu, flu, COVID, and the winter, and then we're going to deal with the pandemic, with people getting taken out of. The longer this goes on, the more people are going to become homeless. So we have to anticipate that. So
I'll just say, I really do appreciate your comments, because you actually bring up some really good points. And one of the points that I would also address to Angela as well, some of the policies as it relates to folks either being put out of shelters or for whatever reason that is, especially as we get into the cold weather months and the winter, and what that means, because I obviously know that hypothermia is a real challenge. So if that's just something that we can keep our eye on and address as well. That being said, let's move on to additional testimony. I know we have a long list of folks.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ingrid Lofgren.
Good afternoon, Councilman Bullock, members of the committee. My name is Ingrid Lofgren. I use she, her pronouns. I'm director of the Youth Initiative at Homeless Persons Representation Project. I really appreciate the testimony of everyone who has personal experience in the shelter system. And I appreciate the questions earlier about the specific needs of youth experiencing homelessness, because the government response to COVID at every level has largely focused on older adults and persons with underlying health conditions, to the exclusion of youth and young adults. But we know that anyone experiencing houselessness, including youth, is high risk, and many youth also do have health conditions and other risk factors. According to Baltimore City's Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program Coordinated Community Plan, which was released by the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, it's estimated that more than 1,700 youth experience unaccompanied homelessness in the city each year, meaning that they're on their own without a parent or guardian. And an additional 7,000 unaccompanied youth experience housing instability. This includes youth who are pregnant or parenting, a disproportionate number of TLGBTQIA and Black youth, particularly Black trans youth, unaccompanied minors who are not in foster care, and other youth with unique needs. Youth are resourceful, and they often avoid the adult shelter system and services that are not designed for them. During COVID, youth have fewer options for avoiding shelter or the streets. A couch or floor that might have been available for a night or two is no longer an option in times of social distancing and quarantine. As a result, youth experiencing homelessness are marginalized and further pushed into unsafe and untenable situations. The city is focused on addressing youth homelessness through the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, or YHDP, a national initiative, but YHDP funding cannot be used for emergency shelter. This is the influx of HUD funding that Ms. Edwards mentioned earlier. It's a total of $3.7 million over 2 years, so wildly inadequate to meet the need, and it can't be used for emergency shelter. The city must not silo conversations about youth homelessness to YHDP. Youth needs have to be part of every conversation about systems planning and resource allocation. In terms of some specific issues related to youth and emergency shelter, I'd like to highlight that Loving Arms, formerly the city's only shelter for unaccompanied minors, has not been in operation since the beginning of the year. This means that now and for the duration of the pandemic, there are no shelter options for unaccompanied minors. Yet the city's shelter response to COVID and the winter shelter plan are silent with respect to the needs of unaccompanied minors. I would ask what would happen if an unaccompanied minor needed shelter today, particularly given that unaccompanied minors experiencing homelessness don't necessarily qualify for child welfare services. What is the city's plan to immediately address this complete absence of resources for vulnerable minors? Similarly, shelter beds for transition-aged youth aged 18 to 24 are inadequate to meet the need. The Nest has been mentioned. It's the city's only youth shelter for transition-aged youth. It has very limited beds and currently is not open from 8:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon, meaning that youth shelter residents, including those with infant children, are not able to shelter in place currently, despite the pandemic and with colder weather approaching. I would ask, what's the plan to expand dedicated shelter capacity for transition-aged youth and to ensure that youth and their children are able to shelter in place? And this includes any specific plans for youth of federal COVID relief funds to meet this need. Also, how is the city engaging youth in designing shelter models that they will actually utilize? Further, city shelters are not safe and welcoming for TLGBTQIA persons experiencing homelessness, and in particular, trans residents experiencing homelessness, as was emphasized during a recent city council hearing last month on trans well-being. What is the city doing to ensure that existing resources are safe and welcoming for TLGBTQIA youth and to develop dedicated resources for them? How does the city's COVID shelter plan, including planned uses of federal funds, and its winter shelter plan account for the unique needs of TLGBTQIA youth and adults experiencing homelessness? And how is the city engaging them to understand their needs and experiences in the shelter system and to get their input regarding shelter models? With respect to outreach, even if the city does create additional capacity to serve youth, including unaccompanied minors and TLGBTQIA youth, it has to reach out to them to communicate about emergency options and gain their trust. What specific outreach strategies does the city have in place to ensure that it understands youth needs, gets youth input, and is able to effectively market shelter and service options to youth experiencing homelessness? Finally, with respect to plans to transition people from shelter to permanent housing, we're concerned that youth will be left out of these resources. There are a lot of issues with the current operation of coordinated access, with youth being unable to effectively access that system, and with their vulnerability not being assessed appropriately and them therefore not being prioritized as highly for permanent housing resources. Those are some of our observations. My colleagues from the Youth Empowered Society Drop-In Center should also be in the hearing, possibly with youth leaders from YES, and I look forward to their comments as well. And I thank you for the hearing and opportunity to speak.
No, absolutely. Thank you. I know a lot of times our young people seem to get lost in the shuffle, and clearly, they have many challenges, especially combining homelessness with the pandemic and all the other things that are going on. So thank you for just lifting up these issues and making it really clear for us. I know we still have other folks to testify. It looked like there was a...
Daniel Wilson,
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
How y'all doing? Thank you. Thank you for your time, all of you. It's been a long time coming. Thank God for this opportunity to speak and for this meeting, for this hearing, for the betterment of humanity. Where should I start? Okay, so first I would like to say I'm a former resident of Green Spring and at Pender Hughes. And I want to say that in response to Ms. Tisha Edwards, I want to say the CDC guidelines were not followed properly. I'm a witness to that. We had congregate settings in the cafeterias, outside of the building, in front of the building. Talking about 10s, 50 or more. I also second a motion with my friend Rico, also known as Arnold, that there were not proper cleaning procedures taken at either Penderhughes or at KIPP. At Penderhughes, it was about 70 plus men and over, I think, 150 women. Again, even there, we were sharing the gyms, the gymnasiums at Penderhughes and at KIPP. Staff members not wearing their masks when I was there, including the directors. So it's basically what I'm saying is there's a lot of counterproductive measures that have been taken at these shelters, even when there have been promises that we're moving forward under Governor Larry Hogan's social distancing executive order. Also have knowledge of 17 plus cases of staff and residents at Green Spring KIPP. We were all tested on June 15, 2020. And I believe a week later, if my notes serve me correctly, they found 17 plus cases that included staff and residents, as well as security advocates. More counterproductive measures have been noted. As my friend Kawumba said, when people are allowed to leave freely and come back, that's counterproductive. That's what she said is right. That's putting us all at risk again, re-exposing us after they tested us. We were tested 2 times on 2 different occasions, and I'm not sure how many cases the second time was found, but it was 17 plus cases, and I received that word from a staff member at Green Spring KIPP, which was under St. Vincent de Paul. I have a question. I'm gonna keep it rolling. I have a question about $7 million that was awarded to the HUD to pay up to 18 months rent. Was that Ms. Tisha Edwards? Was that strictly for HUD, or did that include pots of money given to the shelters for them to provide with people, as Brother Mayo said, who are on Category 4 and 5, who are ready to be transitioned out? Were those monies were the money from the $7 million is what I'm saying? Was some of that money allocated to the shelters to provide permanent housing for the residents of shelters?
No, what I'll say is, I know Councilman Dorsey has another question as well. So after this testimony, again, we'll provide an opportunity to answer that question. Then we'll move on to further testimony. So again, thank you for your testimony, Councilman Dorsey. Just to follow up, and then we'll go on to district testimony. But I don't want the question to get lost at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had to step away for a moment and was able to get back. I had a question for MLHS about the hotels. In addition to the CARES Act money that we have received, is there any money from FEMA? Is there money from FEMA that is reimbursing for any of the hotel expenses, or is there any money from FEMA at all? And what is that being used for, if so?
Angela looks like you're still muted. There you go.
Yeah. So I can follow up with an email regarding any FEMA reimbursements once I get some internal information from Tisha.
Do you know one way or the other if there has been any FEMA money at all?
Well, I'm not at liberty to answer that question right now. I want to give you inaccurate information. So I'll get that information from her, and I'll have her follow up with an email.
And I'll just say, Councilman Dorsey, thank you for answering and for asking that question. I know there are some of us that were trying to figure out what federal monies were available, and while you were away, I did ask part of that question. But again, we need some more clarity. So if you could follow up again with with an email, that would be helpful, just so we're all on the same page. But thank you, Councilman Dorsey, for raising that point.
Yeah, when can I expect to get an answer on that?
Later today.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for your responsiveness.
And can I ask a question that was just raised by the last testimony? It was mentioned that there were a number that all of the residents of at a particular location, I think at Green Spring, were tested on, I think, what did they say, June 15th or something like that, and then a week later it came back that 17 of them had tested positive for COVID. And I'm trying to understand how that jives with what I heard from earlier from MOHS saying that there have not been any outbreaks. And I guess I'm wondering, is there definitive criteria? Is there a number that we're considering an outbreak versus just a cluster of cases or something like that?
Okay, so number 17 that was mentioned earlier, that information is inaccurate. The information that I shared previously during the presentation, that information is accurate. I can get the update from the health department, what's considered like a cluster or outbreak, but we have not had any 17 positive cases of COVID at any of the city-funded shelters.
Okay, so thank you. So as you send out information, just any updates, any verification as far as the numbers, just make sure we're all on the same page. That's definitely helpful. Again, thank you for asking the question. Thank you for your answer, and we'll look forward to your follow-up. Again, I know there are a number of folks who want to testify. Do we have Anthony Williams yet, or who else? Who do we have?
We have Ebony Williams.
Just said that. My man said 14 cases.
Can we?
Shelter. He said at least they ain't had 17 or more. How does that even matter? How does the number of cases even matter? I do not understand that. What does it take? Does it take a building full of people dying for people to actually understand and want to do something? Like, that's crazy. Does it take the whole building to break out for them to actually take that shit serious? Oh man, that shit is not sanitary. I'd rather live in a kennel with dogs right now. And how the fuck they got people living in there? I'd rather live in fucking bark. Shit. I'd rather take a worm and barks. The way they treat people. For me, with the dogs and the cat.
Yes, hello. Ms. Williams? Anthony Williams?
Arnold Mumford is.
I think the person that's talking is the last caller. I don't think he was ever.
Oh yeah, that was Mr. Mumford. Oh, my bad. I thought I had my speaker. I'm sorry. I thought I had my speaker. I'm gonna mute myself. I'm sorry. Well.
Harriet Smith. Harriet Smith.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks for holding this hearing today. My name is Harriet Smith. I use she, her, and hers for pronouns. I'm the Director of Education and Acting Director of Services at the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition. I've been supporting people experiencing homelessness in Baltimore City for 8 or 9 years now in different roles at various different organizations. And I wanted to take a moment to describe the status quo of emergency shelter and other housing resources in Baltimore City. This is non-pandemic times, non-winter shelter times. The status quo that we are talking about returning to is calling or going to an emergency shelter, being placed on a wait list, and putting down possibly a phone number or checking back each day to see if you have a bed available to you. For a number of years, that wait list was over 2 months. So that's 2 months for an emergency shelter. We title it emergency in recognition that things happen and you may not have 2 months to plan for the need for shelter. And yet, that's what we expect of all of our residents here who might need a place that is supposed to be safe to lay their head. If you are lucky enough to get there at the right time and your name is on the list or they have an opening, the chances of getting bitten by bed bugs, assaulted, experiencing degradation, catching the flu, getting kicked out or even banned for periods of time because you seem odd, which is so many of us, let me be real, or if you use drugs or are suspected of using drugs, all of that is the status quo we are talking about returning to when and if it is safe because of COVID. Then you're adding winter shelter on top of that, right? And so winter shelter is the whole city's recognition that some people spend the entire year experiencing homelessness, but the threat of death by hypothermia becomes too much during the winter months. So our shelter system has a mechanism in place that openly recognizes that it is only slightly better than freezing to death. And so I would ask that we all dream of a system that people might choose to go to in every single month of the year and choose to get connected to housing and other connection support, not because the elements are threatening their life, but because it is a helpful place to be connected with. If we continually use that as the metric, that is the place we anticipate returning to, we are accepting that fatality is the measure of success. And I would like to have us have something more proactive, that wellness, connection, and housing are the measures of success, not just fewer than 10 hypothermia deaths, right? Last year, 10 people were reported as dying from hypothermia who are experiencing homelessness. I don't want the success to be 9. I want the success to be 0 and 0 homeless, like 0 people experiencing homelessness. If our goal is to make homelessness rare and brief, it is not brief, at the very least. And we know that it's not rare, even when we measure it in many different ways. It is not rare, and it is certainly not brief. In order to qualify for permanent supportive housing in Baltimore City, you have to have Social Security card, birth certificate, state ID, income. You have to have income, and you have to have a documented disability. All of that has to be documented, as well as 3 years of paper trails proving your homelessness. So if you don't ever go to a shelter and they don't document your presence there, you can't be opted into even the possibility, even the application process for permanent supportive housing. So you have to engage in a shelter system that itself recognizes that it's only slightly better than death for you to even opt into a permanent supportive housing application process. Not supportive housing, just the process. So I'm really I'm sure you can hear the frustration in my voice. I am really frustrated. I'm frustrated that my friends who work in this system and my friends who are her shelter residents in this system are dying, both spiritually and bodily, right? Because of the knowledge that you all, our elected officials, treat them as disposable. So if you are waiting for public pressure to do something, please count this as public pressure. This is it. The wake up calls with car horns at various people's houses, that is public pressure. The posters around City Hall, that is public pressure. The rallies, the vigils, the funerals, the sobbing, that is public pressure. Please count that as public pressure to do something because you have the power to do it. We're here to hold you accountable to doing that, but we cannot continue to say that a good portion of our neighbors don't count because it's just too hard to think of something besides a really degrading system. I know we can all think of a system that is not degrading. We can do it. So BHRC, Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition, stands behind housing our neighbors and other community groups to make sure that you all know that the status quo means death and that we need our government to do better. Please read the briefing that you've been sent by HUN. Every single one of their questions on that page needs thoughtful answers. Thank you so much.
No, I'll say thank you, Ms. Smith. We did hear the frustration in your voice, and we share again your aspiration that this be a system that does not degrade people and that has a higher standard. So again, thank you for raising those points. Again, status quo is something that we're not happy with. So again, thank you for making those points. And again, I recognize that us as a legislative body in this oversight hearing, that's part of our reason for working also with Mayor's Office of Homeless Services and trying to get a better product and better delivery for our people in the city. So again, thank you for raising that point. We're also going to proceed to additional testimony at this point.
Okay. Let's see. I got it. Miha Charleray.
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you all for holding this hearing. My name is Mihir Chaudhary. I'm a physician, a doctor caring for COVID-19 patients. I'm also the medical director for our city's convention center field hospital, our safety net system caring for COVID-19 patients. Many of the patients I care for are individuals experiencing homelessness or experiencing housing instability. And I do really want to emphasize that we are in the midst of a serious nationwide surge in COVID-19. This past week, the number of patients at our field hospital have increased by 500%, and a large number of these individuals have been exposed to the city's shelter system, with over 80% having some prior exposure to our shelter system. From a public health standpoint, we are quite literally, statistically and epidemiologically at the deadliest point in the pandemic thus far, with steep rises in cases throughout the United States. The single highest day of cases was actually just days ago, last Friday, when over 85,000 individuals throughout the country tested positive. This is just the beginning of what I believe is to be the largest surge in our pandemic so far this winter. Winter is in particular the worst time to think about returning individuals to congregate shelter facilities. And I do want to remind, I know many people have mentioned the CDC guidelines and keeping the shelters within CDC guidelines. CDC guidelines also prioritize transition to stable individual housing over sheltered housing. The winter is the worst, really the worst time from a clinical standpoint and a public health standpoint to return to shelters for three reasons. The first has been mentioned, it is flu season. As influenza season comes upon us, the pandemic itself will worsen, our healthcare facilities will be further burdened, and adding fuel to this fire by returning to a shelter-based, shelter-prioritized system will worsen that fact. Second is winter travel, which will cause the virus to spread Many folks are going to be traveling for the winter holiday periods. Returning to congregate living facilities will also just continue to worsen community transmission. And the third fact of the winter is more people will already be gathering indoors. To increase the amount of folks gathered in a single indoor space through a shelter-based prioritized policy will almost certainly worsen community spread. Several medical and public health studies have demonstrated the vast increase in incidence, or in public health terminology, that's the infection rate of COVID-19 in shelters. A recent study in Boston shelters demonstrated that rate to be nearly 50 times higher than individuals who were housed individually. And really, no matter what precautions are taken, shelters will, I'm concerned, will remain engines of community transmission and of a worsening pandemic spread. Returning to them will almost certainly increase rates of infection and death amongst individuals who are homeless and also individuals in the community at large. So I do want to reaffirm with that the kind of the central message here, which is to really stop thinking about transitioning folks from hotels to shelters and really reorient the entire policy if we're thinking about towards this as a moment, a portal moment, to really think about what it would take to assure housing as a human right, and both from a public health standpoint for those who are most affected by housing insecurity and also for the public at large.
Well, Dr. Chaudhry, I'll just, thank you, one, just for your service really on the front lines, you're really working with our folks. Just curious, you mentioned this 500% increase at the field hospital.
Yes.
That does seem very, very troubling. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And I know you mentioned also, obviously, just the exposure that folks have had in terms of homelessness, but you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's kind of troubling to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it is troubling. Initially, our system had mostly seen patients coming in from two major hospital systems, from Johns Hopkins Bayview and from the University of Maryland. However, these past 2 weeks, we've seen patients coming in from really all parts of the state. And the patients we typically see in the field hospital and those who are transferred to the field hospital are those individuals who really have nowhere to go and often are most vulnerable to the pandemic. In addition to the five-fold increase, I would say, Councilman Bullock, that really another concerning part is that 80% of these individuals have had some prior congregate living exposure. So that's really quite concerning and something that we need to think about as far as moving to a winter shelter-based policy.
And again, thank you, for your recommendations as well. Again, as we get into the winter months, I mean, obviously we're thinking about COVID, we're thinking about flu. You mentioned congregate living, and just thinking about some of the best practices and get along with the CDC guidelines. So again, thank you for that testimony. Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
I think that's it. One thing I would add is that I think based on the existing clinical evidence and public health evidence, no matter how well-equipped shelters are, they will unfortunately, and we've seen this throughout data from the entire country, they will unfortunately remain foci of transmission for the virus. So that's something to keep in mind when looking at evidence-based policy.
Again, thank you so much. Again, evidence-based is where we need to be. So, really appreciate testimonies today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll proceed. I know there are a few more folks who want to testify.
Okay. Carolyn Johnson.
Oh. I'm not scheduled to testify. Thank you. I'm just a Me Too.
Okay. Thank you for joining us.
Say again? We want to try him again? Okay. No, he's left us.
All right. Well, we'll proceed with additional testimony.
Let's see what happens here. Okay. Gerardo Benavi. Gerardo Benavi.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you, Councilman Bullock and other members of the Housing Committee for hosting this very important City Council hearing. So my name is Gerardo Benavidez. I'm the Housing Program Coordinator at the Yes Drop-In Center, Youth Empowered Society, the only drop-in center serving youth experiencing homelessness. We provide drop-in services, case management, workforce supports, rapid rehousing services for youth experiencing homelessness, and we're the only drop-in center doing that. I really want to thank just all the testimony that's been provided like thus far, all of the testifiers. There's so much that's already been said that bears repeating 100 times over that right now we are in the midst of a pandemic where congregate living settings are not safe places for people, especially for those experiencing homelessness and especially for youth experiencing homelessness. I guess the fundamental question that I have for the mayor's office is like, what is their ultimate plan to address the needs recognized by youth who are experiencing homelessness and the housing needs given the current lack of options for youth that exist in our current system, from lack of shelter. Earlier on, it was said that there is, one youth shelter with 10 beds and an estimated 2,000 plus youth experiencing homelessness in the city. And from a capacity standpoint, what is the plan around that as far as emergency services go to providing youth with safe housing, with safe shelter services, I think really needs to be questioned. And making sure that we're working our hardest or that the city is working their hardest to provide those very much needed services for youth experiencing homelessness. It's also been said a few times that when people are in shelter or when people are within the city system, that they're receiving case management services, that they're receiving supportive services. And in our experience at Yes, we're seeing a lot of those supportive services severely lacking, that there are not the type of intensive case management supports that people are getting when they connect to shelter, when they connect to other programs. There aren't these wraparound supports when it comes to behavioral health services, when it comes to workforce supports, when it comes to benefits assistance, the whole array of services that people and especially youth need to get into housing, to get into stable housing, and to work towards the futures that they see for themselves. Another thing I wanted to highlight that was mentioned earlier was this notion that a lot of this money right now is being used to house 150 people. And there was nothing mentioned about any of that money being prioritized for youth experiencing homelessness. I heard age and I believe it was vulnerability. And I'm assuming that connects to the coordinated access system and the vulnerability assessment. And just wanted to point out that that system is flawed and historically has not prioritized youth based off of their own lived experience, based off of how they experience homelessness, and that we really do need a very intentional system that works for the needs of youth experiencing homelessness to ensure that they also have access to safe housing, to ensure that they have access to the supportive services to ensure that they don't remain homeless and don't enter back into homelessness. Another area we're really seeing and this is strictly, this is about the shelter system, but just the lack of family beds and the lack of services for parenting youth, the level of like trauma-informed, responsive case management that youth need and that a lot of people experiencing homelessness really need. And again, just going back to that support, to the supportive services that folks need when they access shelter and other forms of housing, I think is especially needed. So just to conclude, I definitely just wanted to, again, elevate the needs of our youth experiencing homelessness. They're powerful, resilient people. And oftentimes when we talk about shelter, when we talk about housing, they are often excluded from that conversation. It is a very adult-centered system, and we really need housing. We really need all of these mechanisms to work for our youth who are experiencing homelessness to ensure that they don't remain homeless and don't perpetuate this cycle of homelessness that is damaging. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gerardo. I mean, you mentioning not only, the issues faced by our young people, which is so critical, but also talking about the supportive services that are needed. Again, I know these are things that we need to continue working on, but thank you for lifting it up. It is very much appreciated. And I know there may be some additional commentary as well. Any other testimony at this point? I think there's a few more people who want to talk.
One more. Okay. Jeff Garrett.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jeff Garrett. I am a homeless advocate. I run an organization called the Faces of Homelessness Speakers Bureau, and I sit on our COC board. I've been active for about 6 years here in Baltimore within the homeless community, having been homeless in Baltimore myself. There's lots of issues within the city of Baltimore with homelessness. But I think a lot of it comes to the fact that the leadership within the city has ignored it for so long and is still ignoring it. We have a mayor that fired our director of homeless services over 6 months ago and is waiting for the next administration to deal with the aftermath. While we're in the middle of a pandemic going on with the lives of people on our streets, and we have no real true leadership. They just extended the contract to somebody who's supposed to go in, Maria Howe, who's been playing us as homeless advocates. When asked direct questions, she's misled us and lied to us. It's very tough to be able to say that people want to work with us and then they turn around and misrepresent themselves to us. So it makes it very difficult to trust anything that MOHS has to say about anything that they're involved with at this point. And that's coming from a very active homeless advocate within the city. It's disheartening to know that there are people within that office that want to keep people in homelessness because it makes them feel better about themselves. It gives them that sense of power and that sense of accomplishment. It goes against everything that stands for about trying to end homelessness, because that's not what we're trying to do within this city. We've never tried to end homelessness in this city. All we have tried to do is perpetuate it, and at the risk of our own citizens. Because we're not talking about beds here, people, and we're not talking about dollars. At the end of the day, we're talking about lives, human lives, your brothers and your sisters, And we keep rushing things, and we keep just passing the buck to somebody else to hopefully they'll take care of it and do it. Our winter emergency shelter is about to start up again. And what did they do? They did the worst thing possible. They put the keys to the city back in the provider's hands. So now the access point to enter into our shelter during winter emergency shelter is the providers, which we've known for the longest time have retaliated and abused and demeaned and demoralized and taken advantage of us for so long, which is why when we worked with the last MOH leader, we had them take over that leadership role because they proved that was happening. But now in the midst of this pandemic, we're going back to putting people's lives at risk again. It's just shameful. And the fact that, that no one in city council up until this moment has ever kind of picked their head around the corner or asked, what the hell's going on here, with the homeless situation in Baltimore, is shocking to me. It's just shocking.
Well, I'll say, Mr. Garrett,
and I'm done. I'm just saying that the problem is the system itself. And until everybody really addresses it correctly, we're always going to have this issue.
No, I say, Mr. Garrett, thank you for bringing up these points. I mean, one, you talk about it being a human issue, and again, we think about human life as being so valuable, and especially how we treat our brothers and sisters. To your point, this is something that I know this committee and other members of the council have really been paying attention to, especially in the last several months, as the pandemic has really affected us all. But you did bring up one point. I meant to ask this of Angela before. I know, and it was mentioned before that there was a new shelter provider that came in place. Could you speak a little bit to why and how that happened, why that provider was selected, and what that means in terms of the management and operations? And I think you're still muted, Angela.
Ooh.
Angela, did you hear?
Angela McCall. Let's see.
Oh, there you are. Yes. Go ahead. For some reason, we can't hear you. Well, I'll just say this. I know we're going to try to get additional testimony, but if you could also, I know you're going to respond to a couple of questions that the council had. If you could add that in your response, since we can't hear you now, and just talk about the service provider who was selected, why, and how that change happened. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, for some reason we can't hear you. Hold on for a second. Oh, okay. Thank you, and to put in the chat. Okay, we were facilitated. Okay, see, we could work around with technology. So there we go. Let me. I'll pull that up. So again, you mentioned the RFP. I want to see that that message. Give me a second. All right, let me read that off just so everybody hears it. Thank you again. So we have facilitated RFP process, and time organization was selected by the RFP panel. Okay, and so I know there may be additional questions that may come up in the future, but thank you for giving us that clarification at this point. Anyone else who's here to testify, please, at this point.
Singer, Jeff Singer, go ahead. Jeff Singer. Okay, we'll come back. Jerome Paler. Okay, let's see. Karen Wabecki. Karen Wabecki. Nope. Margaret Collar. Margaret Collar.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Who's this?
This is Jerome Paler. How y'all doing?
Hey, Mr. Paler, please proceed. Thank you. We're doing well. How are you?
Good, sir. First, Mr. Bullock, I want to thank you for all that you do for the city of Baltimore, particularly this forum. I'm a member of HUN, Housing Our Neighbors, and I'm also the assistant pastor over at Mount Vernon Place United Methodist Church. And my question to the council and the panel is how can we, particularly the church, get involved and help facilitate resources for the homeless kids that were talked about in the beginning of the forum? That's about it, bro.
Look, first off, God bless you and thank you. One, just as a person of faith, but also, reaching out. A lot of times, and I don't want to get too preachy, but a lot of times, we don't think about the church as what it means outside of the walls of the church. And so to step out and make that offer, it means a whole lot. I don't know if MOHS is able to respond at this point, but I think, I would assume that all assistance will be helpful. But Angela, are you able to speak on that at this point?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. All right.
Hi. My response to the passage, any donations can be dropped off at our office. You can reach out to our outreach coordinator, Jesse Stevens. She facilitates all donations and sends them out to our provider. So it's jesse.stevens@baltimorecity.gov.
And thank you, Ms. McCauley. And since I know we weren't able to hear you before, I know I was able to read off your response around the RFP. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at this point, given some of the comments or questions?
Yeah, so as everyone is aware, this is the second year that we facilitated RFP process. Last spring, we defunded a provider, and our office took over operations from March into October the 1st. We had approximately 6 RFP proposals. We had a panel of 6 folks that included a member of the Lived Experience Committee, folks within our office, and a member of the Continuum of Care. And the RFP panel, as I mentioned, they selected time, organization. They started on October the 1st. Our office did an extensive comprehensive transition plan for them in preparation for them starting on October the 1st. And we continue to work with them on a weekly basis, providing support and guidance as this, is a new process for them. They've had, smaller shelters, but this is the biggest program that they have. And we felt that they were the best selection for this time.
All right, thank you for that answer, and thank you for working through technical challenges as we all are. Do we have anybody else who's here to testify? I know there was a long list.
Yes, Melody Conscious. Melody Conscious.
No.
Okay, she just sent a message now. Okay. Well, good. Okay. Nick Brooks. Nick Brooks.
Did you spell that right?
Which one?
The second one, you didn't, but I found it.
Nick Brooks.
What is it?
Okay. Phil Davis. Not participating, Mr. Chair. Sam Williamson.
I'm not here to testify. I'm just paying attention to what everyone is saying.
Thank you. Let's see, where was it? Zion Hunter testified already, Mr. Chair. Zion Hunter. And, well, no response to that exhausts the list, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else like to testify?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, it's Richard Mayo again. If it pleases the council, I'd like to just rebut on a few pointers that were raised by some of my colleagues as well as Miss Angela. It's still time for me because I spoke earlier, but some of the issues were raised afterwards. Yeah, so well, a lot of the things that like Jeff was saying, because we've actually seen some of the things together, is that certain things are discussed on paper. However, it never matches what's the reality of what's on the ground. So we'll go to a meeting with MOHS and make some recommendations, and then out of those recommendations, either from the time we leave the meeting to the time it gets down to the providers have always historically had a way of messing it up. and coming up with their own draconian policies. I then question as to who came up with this, because we didn't come up with any of the things that they were doing in MOHS. Just real quick, the people that out of all the rumors that were of the 17 cases or 12 cases, because there are rumors that circulate within the homeless community, but the only place that had a large cluster of cases was Code Blue, and that's why it's boarded up and it's shut down. Granted, they have convalescent care, but they were still unable to manage that facility. And yet, out of all the other providers, the people that are in motels are being treated with respect and dignity by the staff members. However, anytime Code Blue comes in there, who's currently running Holiday Inn Express, where I did outreach this past Saturday, it was horrifying. And that's how they treat people on a daily basis. And in other words, they got rewarded for screwing up, pardon the French, screwing up the shelter they had, and they got given Holiday Inn Express to then not only mess it up, but disrespect people once again. But thank you.
Thank you. And again, we talk about dignity, we talk about respect, and again, all the suggestions and all the questions. I know MOHS is listening, and we're looking for response and action as well. So thank you again. I know there's one last question, though, either from Adriana Foster or Rachel Cutler. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councilman Bullock. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I just want to thank the council, the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, and everybody who participated in this hearing today. I really want to leave with some actionable items because, as everyone else attested to much better than I can, this is a life or death situation, and we can't say that enough. We are returning to shelters in the middle of winter during the pandemic. That is a death sentence. I'm just repeating what Kumba already said. So I just want to reiterate, this is a life or death situation, and our hope is to leave here today with sort of several sort of key actionable items. One is, what is the permanent housing plan? Can we get a plan from MOHS to ensure that residents are not moved back into congregate shelters, but are moved into housing? We are housing our neighbors, and many partners would love to work with MOHS to develop that plan and ensure that folks are not being moved to congregate danger shelters, but that they're going from hotels to permanent housing. That's why the question around FEMA dollars is so important, and that's why the question around CARES Act money is so important, because there might be some flexibility around funding depending on the answers to those questions. So we hope we can continue to work with you, and we hope we can work with you to develop this permanent housing plan. Again, our transition to housing and not back to the shelters. Thank you.
I'll just say thank you. And I think it's probably the perfect way to end this oversight hearing. Again, thinking about actionable items and the questions that you asked. Again, making sure that this is a life or death issue, especially as we're getting into the winter months. And I think that everyone on this panel and everyone in attendance and earshot can agree on that. So again, we'll be looking to continue partnerships with the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, but also with the folks who are affected on the ground, anyone who is also representing not only people who are living through it, but also who are advocating for folks who are dealing with it, whether they be young people, seniors, our trans community as well. So again, thank you all for lifting up these points because they are so critical. And again, I also thank everyone for their time today. I know we went a little bit long today, but it's worth the time and worth that investment when we're talking about human lives in our city. So again, thank you all for your time today. At this point, we will stand adjourned.
Okay, we're ready to end the meeting.